Right.
You know, I mean, so the schools, all the school systems are feeling it too.
Wow, wow, wow.
So
You know, it's crazy how
that's
your
the
mind
big-
works. I was supposed to go with my husband. My husband's a plumber, and I was supposed to go with
Hello and welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club, streaming live from the Boathouse at Confluence Park. I'm Steve Marks, Chair of the CMC Board of Trustees and President of Hannah News Service here in Columbus. Thank you for tuning in today. We're going to welcome two new members to CMC, Marquis Pressler-Preininger from the Columbus Board of Realtors and Amy Rapacelli from the Inn and Spa at Cedar Falls. Thank you. A word about membership. Conversation moves us forward, and members power our conversations. We need you, the patrons and fans of CMC, to step up and support CMC. Please join us in our mission by becoming a member today. You can learn more about CMC and register for events, join CMC, renew your membership, or make a donation anytime at columbusmetroclub.org. Metro Club live streaming is presented by Emergency Response Fund of the Columbus Foundation and in partnership with the Columbus Dispatch and PNC. CMC's Optimal Health Series is presented by OSU Wexner Medical Center and Nationwide Children's Hospital. We'd especially like to thank those of you watching today who donated a seat to CMC by purchasing a virtual seat. As a thank you for contributing, virtual seat patrons are invited to participate in a private, topic expert-hosted Zoom conversation after the forum. It's a great way to connect with other viewers and participate in the conversation. We are grateful for our virtual seat patrons and are able to continue live streaming services in large part because of you. A generally available vaccine for COVID is the light at the end of the tunnel of this pandemic. Recent announcements are promising as research, development, and trials of vaccine candidates are all on record pace. For this to happen so quickly is an amazing accomplishment of science, technology, and medicine, and unparalleled in human history. What is happening behind the scenes? Well, please welcome our experts to discuss. Susan Koletar, Director of the Division of Infectious Diseases and Principal Investigator of the COVID Clinical Trials Unit at OSU. Dr. Lauren Bakaletz, Principal Investigator and Director, the Center for Microbial Pathogenesis, the Research Institute at Nationwide Children's Hospital, and our host, Interim Executive Director, State of Ohio Leadership Institute, the John Glenn College of Public Affairs at The Ohio State University, Greg Moody. Greg, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank you to our experts who join us on a day that the world is watching the news and asking questions about promising new vaccines. At least 2 COVID-19 vaccines seem highly effective, boosting optimism at a time when health systems are being pushed to a breaking point. Here are the headlines today. Nursing home cases surge to all-time high as COVID-19 sweeps U.S. Nearly a quarter of American hospitals are running out of workers. More than a dozen states have issued new rules as COVID cases strain hospitals. That's true here in Ohio, where a record 8,000 cases were reported in a single day and hospitalizations are at record levels. In response, Governor DeWine announced a 21-day statewide curfew starting tomorrow. As a quick aside, I want to thank Columbus Metropolitan Club for modeling the responsible and safe behavior we see here. We arrive with our masks on. We keep them on until we take our seats on the panel, and these seats are about 14 feet apart. Today, there are less than 10 people here in the room with us. We try to make this presentation as accessible as possible, but assure you that we take every precaution to stay safe and honor our responsibility to others. Along with the grim headlines, there's promising news. Those 2 vaccines, the companies that make them, Pfizer and Moderna, are expected to file for FDA emergency use within days. But ironically, as the likelihood of a vaccine is increasing, the number of Americans who say they will take the vaccine is decreasing. According to the Pew Research Center, only half of American adults say they would get a COVID-19 vaccine if it were available to them today. That's a big drop from only 4 months ago, when 72% said they'd get the vaccine. Americans are now divided over whether to get a vaccine, they say, based on concerns about the safety and effectiveness and the pace of the approval process. So that's the point of our discussion today, to hear from trusted experts what the science is telling us, how we can expect it to work, how can we trust what's safe. To explore these issues, we're fortunate to have 2 of Ohio's leading experts with us, Dr. Susan Koletar and Dr. Lauren Bakaletz. Dr. Bakaletz, you are a researcher. Your lab is focused on determining the molecular mechanisms that underlie respiratory infections. Can you help us understand the science behind vaccines generally? What is the evidence of their impact and safety?
Absolutely. So all vaccines, regardless of what you're targeting, are developed to be delivered to humans to induce an immune response that will protect you from that disease. Ultimately, the long-term goal of all vaccine development is to eradicate that disease from humanity, as we've done with smallpox. So the process used to do that has to do with understanding what organism is causing the disease, how it causes disease, and then trying to identify part of that organism or the whole organism as an entity in its entirety to use in a vaccine to give to humans so that they will develop that immune response that then protects them either from disease or prevents them from transmitting that virus or that bacterium to another person. So in order to get there, it is an extremely rigorous and complex and highly regulated process, and I can say that myself because I've had firsthand experience doing that. The traditional way that vaccines are discovered, developed, tested, and move through the process can usually take 15 to 20 years. But because this is a pandemic that we're facing right now, because of the lethality, the high transmissibility, and the pandemic nature of this event, we've had to learn how to streamline that process, work together much more effectively to move these vaccines through the process without compromising safety. And I can tell you that safety is part of every single step in the process, in addition to making sure that the vaccine works. And we have a history, a long-standing history of vaccines that work and they're safe. And we know this because we can see that we no longer deal with smallpox. We have a tremendous reduction in diseases that used to plague childhood and plague humanity. So this process is non-traditional, but that does not mean that it's not safe. And how they determine efficacy, you're starting to see this information in the news, and Susan can speak to it even more directly than I am because she's involved in some of these clinical trials right now. So I would invite her to contribute to this as well in terms of how do we determine the efficacy of these vaccines for COVID-19.
Thanks, Lauren. I want to emphasize what you said, a couple things. One is that all vaccines are designed to try to develop an immune response. And we have sometimes the concern about vaccines is based on not knowing what the bad diseases were. I mean, it's almost an irony that that there's concern about vaccines that have actually prevented serious diseases, as Dr. Bakaletz has just said. I think in terms of clinical trials, again, some of this is about how we collaborate, how we work together. I personally think the term Operation Warp Speed has different connotations than it was meant to. It was intended to mean that it was working quickly and at sort of a high-level scientific progress. Sometimes I think that can be misinterpreted, that warp, and the word in itself is a little bit fuzzy. Speed makes you think that it's not safe, but I can tell you that the process of clinical trials from the preclinical development to the actual execution in clinical trials to ultimate licensure has mechanisms along the way to always assure safety. And I feel very, very strongly about that. And I think we've actually seen evidence of that in the trials that are ongoing. We know it's not a secret that a couple of the trials were paused for a couple weeks to assess safety. And I think that's a good thing.
Well, there's a lot in your comments there. Let's take some parts of it in a little more detail. How does a vaccine actually work? And I've heard this one, the COVID vaccines, as potentially being different. Are they experimental, or is this technology we've seen before?
So there are three basic categories of vaccines. We can use the whole organism, the whole virus, the whole bacterium, but we've weakened it. So it can induce an immune response but not cause disease. There are vaccines that are subunit vaccines. So we take parts of the viruses or parts of the bacteria or parts of the parasite, and we immunize a person with those. And then there are these new vaccines, which are the nucleic acid vaccines. They're all designed to get the body to respond, to make antibodies, to teach the cellular arm of the immune response to be protective, to eradicate the disease, to protect that person should they see that particular organism again in their lifetime. So as you know, some of the vaccines we get will give us lifetime immunity. Other vaccines maybe don't have to do that. So vaccines that they're developing for, say, travelers' diarrhea, you might only need that during the time that you're traveling to an area where that's a problem. It is true that many of the vaccines, not all of them, but many of the vaccines being developed for COVID-19, including the two that we hear the most about in the news, the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine, are nucleic acid vaccines. What we're doing in that case is actually giving the human a piece of the genetic material or the genome of this virus. And when we give that to the human, it makes our cells create that virus protein that then we then respond to immunologically. So it is true that prior to these vaccines, we have not had nucleic acid based vaccines progress this far in the United States, but that does not mean we haven't been working towards that. If you think back to 2002 when we had SARS, if you think back to about 10 years later when we had the MERS epidemic that never reached pandemic proportion, scientists and investigators and companies were already starting to work towards this, and they have been for many other diseases as well. So while it might be first in terms of the commonality of this approach, it's definitely not untested, and it's being rigorously tested now.
Yeah, I want to take off on that point because this technology has really been in progress for a while. We've really, scientists have been working on this. There's nothing that's been approved. There are no mRNA vaccines approved yet for use. But the technology really takes advantage of the basic premise of vaccination, making the body think that it's been exposed to whatever, a virus, a bacteria, and then developing antibodies. And the more effective you can do that, one, the more effective the response. And I think this is really starting to play out with the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines. Hopefully there'll be some durability, that it will be long-lasting, and thirdly, that it will be safe. So I think the technology is really driving this whole pandemic, which without sounding crass, I think it's a great thing, right? We have learned so much in a short period of time, and when I think about this, the speed at which science is progressing is astounding. It has been less than a year. I know it feels like a lifetime. It feels like a lifetime to me. It feels like a lifetime to all of us. But it's been in less than a year that we've been able to identify the virus, sequence the virus, develop these technologies to develop immunity, and get it into large human trials.
Well, if I I could add to that, too. And one of the remarkable things about COVID-19 was from the time that they publicly announced the genome of this virus, this new virus that had never been seen before, to the first vaccine going into human was about 63 days. And that is because, exactly as Dr. Koletar commented on, we've learned so much along the way. We have computer systems, artificial intelligence, experience that helps us go quicker, but not at a sacrifice of safety. So to see these first nucleic acid-based vaccines give 95% protection, I know it's early, but that is remarkable and very exciting. And it's very exciting to those of us who are vaccinologists, who spent our whole career developing vaccines, because they were aiming for 50% efficacy as part of Operation Warp Speed. And we're seeing upwards beyond 90% efficacy. That is tremendously encouraging and exciting indeed.
And I think, I'm sorry.
No, I'm sorry.
I could quit talking and let you ask the question.
Oh, no, I don't mean to interrupt.
To that, I think the optimism with the current knowledge that we have from the companies, and I'll just make a snide comment that we haven't seen the actual literature. We've seen the New York Times reviews and CNN, but I think the premise behind that and the vaccines that are being tested now are all focusing on the spike protein. I think that bodes well for the vaccines across the board, so I'm very hopeful.
Yeah, you both mentioned the kind of benefits of the pandemic having this accelerating effect on how we've attacked this particular problem. But at the same time, there is this issue of public trust, and sometimes rushing seems like something that would erode that. I know normally it takes a decade to develop, something that you could take to market. Can you say a little bit more about what that process actually is and how it's possible to both speed it up and at the same time ensure safety? Just go into that a little bit more detail.
Sure. So there's classically 4 stages or 4 phases by which vaccines are tested. A phase 1, which is usually a smaller number of people. You're looking at, is the vaccine immunogenic? Does it induce the response you want? Is it safe? And are there any obvious side effects? And then phase 2, you're still determining safety and efficacy, but you're expanding the size of the group you're testing. And this allows you to detect other side effects, maybe less common side effects. By phase 3 studies, you're confirming that effectiveness, you're making sure the dose that you're giving is correct, you're monitoring the side effects, and you're comparing often to standard of care or other treatments. So this is where you're getting into very large numbers of patients. And I want to take a moment and thank everybody who's ever participated in any of the clinical trials for this vaccine. This could not happen without you. So we are all going to benefit from that and are grateful. And even after a vaccine is approved, there's a phase 4 where post-licensure, we're still monitoring vaccines for safety. Those steps occur even if you're trying to compress the time. So one of the ways we've been able to achieve that is by establishing a public-private partnership where many, many government agencies, the Department of Defense, the National Institutes of Health, the Department of Health and Human Services, BARDA, private industry, many, many, many entities came together to try to figure out how we could move those trials along, compress them, maybe combine them a bit. But one of the biggest things we did was start to produce vaccine before we even knew if they were safe and effective. Does that incur some financial risk? Yes, but it does not compromise safety. There was also a huge influx of resources, so $10 billion were instantly pumped into this effort through Operation Warp Speed, and I agree with Susan, the name made me cringe when I heard it, because the concern that we're seeing now that people are, it's natural for them to think that maybe are you doing it too fast and you're ignoring safety along the way. And what this has been is just a tremendously efficient process where people came together. And instead of a vaccine company, for example, trying to develop 4, 5, or 6 of their vaccines in-house and everything having to move through the process one step at a time, and they're devoting resources to all those efforts, all of these entities were able to come together and work on, I think there are 6 vaccines now, if I'm not mistaken, that are being advanced the most, but there are 200 more that are in development, and people are working towards that effort. All of this has contributed to the ability to do this instead of in a decade or 15 years, into about 12 to 18 months. But I will emphasize, as I'm sure Susan will as well, that safety, the rigor and the way that this is regulated in terms of having to prove that the vaccine is safe has not changed, and it will not change.
I want to zero in on one part of that process. You mentioned approval, and Dr. Koletar, I know you've had extensive experience with clinical trials. Can you help us understand who decides when the vaccine is ready? What is that process? And what is it in the approval process itself where we can trust the safety of what's being approved?
Yeah, so let me step back to 1 second and reemphasize the point. The conduct of clinical trials is a well-established process from preclinical work and early work, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. And I think it's important for everyone to know that that process has not been compromised. We've not skipped stages or phases. They've just been compressed. And I think that's a critical point. One of the reasons we can get to knowledge quicker in terms of endpoints is partly related to the large sample sizes, at 30,000, 40,000 participants in these trials. And again, I will echo Lauren's comments, and I'll expand it. I have a great deal of gratitude to anyone who has ever participated in any clinical trial. That's why we've made such progress in medicine. So let me get back to your question, Greg. So once you get through phase 3 studies, and the effectiveness is analyzed, the safety data is analyzed, the data is all collated and sent to the, in the case of the United States, to the FDA, and they go through a rigorous review. And I have been personally impressed with the rigor that the FDA has approached all of the emergency use authorizations. And let me divert for a second here. There's emergency use authorizations, which means there's enough evidence of benefit and certainly a higher benefit-risk ratio to move this process along a little sooner to distribute to the public. That's important because that's different than FDA approval, but it just takes into account the pandemic as it is and really trying to move things forward to, for lack of a better term, get the biggest bang for your buck for people who are exposed and at risk. Once all the data is in, and one of the reasons the intent now will be to go for an emergency use authorization because, again, this is a relatively short period of time. The earliest vaccines trial started in July. It's November, so you can do the math, not a long period of time. And so we need to continue to collect data in terms of not just effectiveness, but long-term safety and long-term durability of these responses. So I think, and I don't work for the FDA or the federal government, but I'm going to say the process likely will be that, and the FDA actually put stipulations on when they could actually receive the data from these companies in terms of follow-up. They had to have at least 2 months of follow-up after the vaccines. Once that happens, they'll review it and they'll make decisions based on the data. I think we all think, and we're all optimistic, that they'll say, yes, this should go forward. Then I think the next step will be, there will be some stipulations around that process in terms of distribution, because even though the manufacturers have started production, they're not even close enough to distributing it to the whole world. So obviously, healthcare providers, first responders, frontline workers likely will be the first here, with others to follow, those who are at higher risk. I may be wrong because I'm wrong a lot these days, but I would think there'll be another few months at least before the FDA would even consider going for approval. That being said, I think we should rely on the science and the data, and if it really shows that these are that effective, then the FDA may move forward with approval. That happened with the drug remdesivir, you all may have heard of. It was the first antiviral drug for the treatment of SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19. That went through that same process: clinical trials, expanded access, emergency use authorization, and now FDA approval, actually in record time. So I don't actually have a crystal ball, so I can't exactly say when, but things are moving much more quickly. But I think the point of that long-winded answer was safety is really a primary consideration along the way. And because if something is not safe, even if it's 100% effective, then you lose the battle. And then you lose the trust. And what needs to happen to really get a control over this disease, this pandemic, is that people need to trust the results and take part.
And I think to add to that, too, we're all very excited about the news releases, but these data will be submitted to peer-reviewed journals. We're all looking very much forward to actually seeing the data. So those data will go through the process where they're submitted to the journal. Experts in the field will review that data, often push back with questions, challenges, concerns, get some more detail about that. And ultimately, those papers will be published in the peer-reviewed literature for all of us to look at and evaluate. And the scientific process is going to go on probably long after these vaccines are approved or long after many of us can take our masks off, but please do not do that yet. And, you know, I think it's going to be a fascinating lesson for us scientifically, medically, from a standpoint of how to manage pandemics. There will likely be other pandemics, or at least risks, threats of pandemics in our future. And if there is any silver lining to this, it's going to be that we've learned so much about where we weren't prepared, how we need to be prepared. You know, beyond the vaccine itself, there's going to be how do you deliver it? How do you distribute it? Do we have enough syringes? Do we have enough, you know, medical sharps waste containers? Do we have enough gloves? Do we have enough vials? You know, what's happening now is that we're starting to realize how there are other things in this supply chain that are going to be very important even once we get these vaccines either authorized for use or approved. And so everything we've learned in that process, I'm very hopeful will carry forward to the next time we might face a similar challenge, although we hope we won't. The microorganisms don't really read our books and listen to our hopes. They evolve the way they evolve.
So Greg, we told you would just keep talking, so why don't you ask us another question?
Well, no, this is, and actually, this is exactly my next question. I mean, we're how does it work and how's it developed? And but this issue of, okay, so now I won't hold you to when we'll have it, but when we have it, there is a process of distribution. And I know a lot of resources have gone in on the front end to support the development and creating the vaccine. My sense is probably less resources so far focused on what will be required to actually get the vaccine to people. So can you say a little bit about how that process works, what the priorities are likely to be, and what are the logistics that have to be overcome to be able to accomplish that?
So I think a couple of things. Perhaps not quite as much work, or at least quite as much time spent on the work trying to deal with vaccine prioritization. But in fact, as the results were starting to come out, groups started being put together. And so the flow will be the federal government to the state governments, to the feds to the states, and then the states will distribute according to algorithms that are being worked on. Actually, there's, and I can say with pretty much certainty that all the health systems in Central Ohio have their own groups that are looking at the prioritization structure. I know I'm part of that at Ohio State. Some of the early distributions will be distributed, as I said, based on the stipulations that are part of the emergency use authorization, and we all think that it will be frontline workers and first responders, and then people who are at highest risk. And then some of this depends on supply, right? So with the news of both Pfizer and Moderna vaccines seeming to be pretty darn effective, that may double the supply that goes out early on. So I think there's a lot of work being done in terms of prioritization. The distribution is a little bit more complicated because it depends on a couple things. Some of the things that Lauren mentioned, but also some of the things like storage. If you need to have a -80 freezer, that's not in everyone's bandwidth. So I think those are the things that are going to have to be worked out, and quite honestly are being looked at on a daily basis. How do you distribute, and then how do you distribute it away from large cities? I mean, obviously, you want to make sure that the denser populations have access, but this is a worldwide problem. And if you look at just the statistics in Ohio, rural Ohio is in some dire straits, and how do we, under the concept of justice and equity, how do you distribute to them? And I think those are topics that are all under a lot of consideration right at the moment. I didn't actually answer your question, but that I can.
No, that's very helpful. So now as an individual, I've kind of made my decision, and I trust the process has worked, and I've taken the vaccine. It's been distributed to me in a way that I can take it. What should I expect of it? How effective is this, and what does it really mean? Because, for example, when you hear 95% effective, that almost sounds like a cure, but we're really not talking about a cure. So what does effective mean, and what should we expect of a vaccine?
Well, I think it's important to note that this 95% efficacy is after 2 doses. And these doses are given, I don't even know what the time apart, they're given 2 to 3 months?
No, it's either it's 21 days or 28 days.
So you're not going to get that protection until you receive your second dose, and maybe even a little bit of time after that. So it's tremendously promising, it's tremendously exciting, but I don't think, I heard Francis Collins this morning talk about, the hope was that by maybe April of next year, the majority of people have started to be immunized, or if not, are fully immunized, and by summer, they will be as well. But until enough of the population is immune to prevent that transmission, that herd immunity we hear about, it's not going to be something where we're going to relax social distancing, mask wearing, and hand washing, good hygiene, if you will, because until that point is reached, there is still the possibility to be infected and for us to transmit that virus, especially in this case, as Susan mentioned. It's one thing to distribute in a densely populated area. It's another to get to the less populated area, the more rural areas, or if you don't have a -80 freezer, and this is standard in our laboratories that we have a -80 freezer, but that is not going to be something that's very common at CVS or Walmart or any other place that you might be thinking about the vaccine being distributed. And this was actually highlighted in one of the news releases because the Moderna vaccine required a little less stringent freezing. It was -20, which is a little more common. That vaccine, once thawed, could stay in a refrigerator for about 30 days rather than just 7 days. So it doesn't mean that the Pfizer vaccine won't be made and distributed. We're going to need many vaccines probably to be made and distributed, but each is going to come with their own challenges, and we think about this a lot when we think about the global disease burden, of individuals who might not have access to health care at all. How do we get the vaccine to them?
So let me go back to your question, Greg. So first of all, congratulations for wanting to take the vaccine. Thank you for the trust in the system. Secondly, my second comment was going to be what Lauren said, don't throw away your mask. We are not at the point that, and let me just go back a second about the efficacy that is being touted. It's in people, they were looking at prevention of disease or prevention of severe disease. And the numbers are pretty promising and clearly look like there was less disease in the folks who were in the vaccine arms than the placebo arms. What we don't know, because there's not been enough time and there's not been enough analysis, or at least not publicized, is what does that mean in terms of people getting disease who weren't symptomatic? Does that mean that they are no longer able to transmit the vaccine? Or does it mean that they've been able to control it enough so that they themselves don't get sick? But perhaps if they have, an elderly grandmother who just had, chemotherapy, is that still a risk? And so I think this goes back to we need more time to learn more things, but I think the idea of ultimately broad or widespread immunizations will help with herd immunity.
Well, and I appreciate how you're setting that expectation, where it's okay to be optimistic and enthusiastic that this looks like it can be really effective, but at the same time to really understand that it's not a cure-all and that we are going to be in this together for a while. And I think that issue of setting clear expectation is just, it's so important. I do want to, as an aside, say we are going to be able to take questions from the audience in just a few minutes through the live stream chat. As we prepare for that, though, I would like to ask one last question of you. You both expressed so much optimism, and a couple of times you've said that we are learning things that matter to the future. And whether that's in the science, the development process, how this is approved, what we're learning about the vaccine itself, just reflect a little bit on what you think is going to be kind of the real benefit of this going forward. What have we learned that really matters from this experience?
So one of the things I talk about when I speak to my students or others in the lab is that, you know, for me as a microbiologist, I think about viruses and bacteria every moment of my career, every moment of my life. I think about them, how to contain them, and I have enormous respect for them because I study them. I know how powerful they are. I know how they can rapidly evolve to something like we're seeing now, which is unheard of. You know, when I studied microbiology, we heard about the 1918 flu pandemic. I never, in all of my career, thought I would face being part of in the middle of a pandemic. So I think just the general understanding of the public that we have to be respectful of these organisms, we have to be careful about what we do, we have to listen to guidance about how to keep these viruses, in this case, from getting from one of us to another of us, the danger of that, of us not respecting that and really thinking about how to not transmit that virus. You see a precipitous spread of this. So I think from that standpoint, it's been very good in terms of our awareness of these organisms and to think as more of a global community. How do we help each other? How do we help each other through this? How do we combine forces, combine resources to take this on with a world view? And I hope that that is carried forward.
And I would say knowledge is power, and I've been almost overwhelmed by how much we've been able to expand our scientific knowledge. And I say that coming from a career of doing clinical research primarily with HIV. I started my career with a sort of unknown virus then, and the rapidity of response that we've seen is in part because of things that we've learned from other processes, other diseases, and I think COVID-19 will be no exception. We will use all this warp speed attained knowledge and put it hopefully to good use. And then finally I would say we have seen the resiliency of the human spirit, and it's not been easy. Some days you just want to go, what the heck? But we always keep moving forward and keep surviving and thriving. And I think it's a good lesson for hopefully for humanity. That sounds a little lofty, but I actually believe that.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, I see we have a couple questions and look forward to hearing from the audience.
Well, we have quite a few questions from our online viewers. Diane Sater-Wee from AIAM, which I don't know what that is. I work at a school teaching nursing, acupuncture, massage therapy, and medical assisting. Should we mandate vaccines prior to attending in-person school? And how do you see the vaccines rolling out to schools?
So I have a problem with the word mandate because it implies that there's no free will and choice. I think our jobs are focused on educating and making people understand the risks and benefits. And when the benefits outweigh that, I think we encourage that. We've talked about this a lot in hospitals. How do you mandate employees, staff to get flu shots? I mean, that's a big deal. So I don't know if I would say mandate, but I would say I would strongly encourage everyone to learn as much as they can and take it in context.
Ron Henrik asks a general question: who else in the world is working on a COVID-19 vaccines, and are they working with us?
There are many, many people working on COVID-19 vaccines. As I said, there's a recent review article that John Tregoning wrote where there are over 200 vaccines, and then there's also therapeutics and diagnostics in development. So virtually every country that I'm aware of has something going on in the vaccine development. So some are working with us. Some of these companies are U.S. companies. Some of these companies are European-based or China-based or other otherwise located. So there is quite a unified effort, and as I said, we hear a lot about the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine, but there are many others that have progressed and are moving along, and we'll start to hear about those too, I would imagine, in the coming weeks and months.
Jaron Terry from Jaron Terry Communications asked, I'm sure my question may have already been answered, but I'm anxious about how the anti-vaxxers' actions may affect the effectiveness of the vaccine. And I'm going to tack on to that. Is there a need for a public relations and advertising campaign to encourage people to get vaccinated?
Well, I think there's clearly a need for a public relations campaign to educate people about the benefits of the vaccine and the safety. And I think the best we can do to engender trust is to give people the information that we know. Like there shouldn't be, I don't think there should be any secrets in science, actually. I think when we learn something, we should expand on that and allow people to know that. I think I alluded to this early on. I think the irony of anti-vaccination sentiment is that many of those people have not lived or seen or had or been affected by the actual diseases that the vaccines prevent. So I can tell you, I've taken care of people with tetanus. That's a horrible thing. I actually had measles when I was a kid, in my distant memory. I mean, so I think again, it's sort of our job to continue to educate as much as we can and let people decide. But it's hard to argue with such just effectiveness.
Well, if I could follow up on that a little bit, when I teach vaccinology, when I talk to students, it was actually almost funny to me the other day when I was talking to the students, because I relayed this series of facts that before vaccines, parents in the United States could expect that every year polio would paralyze 10,000 children. Rubella, or German measles, would cause birth defects and intellectual disability in 20,000 newborns. That measles would infect 4 million children and kill 500. That diphtheria would be one of the most common deaths of school-aged children. That Haemophilus influenza type B would cause meningitis in 15,000 children and leave many of them with permanent brain damage. And whooping cough, or pertussis, would kill thousands of infants. And some of my students said, what's diphtheria? And I said, that's exactly the point. You don't even know about these diseases. You don't even know people who had them. But for many of us, and those of us who think back, who actually experienced or know people who had these diseases, vaccines are what prevent us from experiencing these as a public health crisis now. So I completely agree with Dr. Koletar. Education is absolutely key for her as a clinician, for me as a basic scientist, for us, any of us who are working in this field. Education is so important.
Carol Mary asks, how long did it take the 1918 influenza epidemic to subside, and is there a correlation between what we can expect today?
You know, I don't recall exactly how long it took to subside, but the second peak was where you saw the majority of the deaths in that pandemic. So I believe it was probably about a 2-year span of time, maybe less than that, but considering where we were and the fact that people were dying actually of the bacterial secondary infections, the pneumonia that came on the heels of that flu, it lingered on a bit. But it was, I think, about a 2-year process. And remember, back then, 1918, we don't have the resources, the facilities that we have today to better manage a pandemic.
Yeah, and I would say that even in this short period of time, the care of hospitalized patients has gotten better in the last 6 months. And so the 1918 pandemic is a little different because it burned out probably quicker because so many people died. I mean, bacteria and viruses actually need something to live on and off of, so if the host is gone. But now, and I'll go back to the clinical trials world. The clinical trials world has continued to look at treatment modalities, management modalities, and even in this new surge, we're doing better taking care of people in the hospital than we did 6 months ago.
You've addressed this a little bit, but let's talk a little bit more. Bill Lafayette, any other diseases beyond COVID to which this new technology could be applied? And I'll add to that just a little bit. So how will the COVID-19 experience affect the development of future vaccines for other diseases?
So, No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think it's a game changer. I mean, and will it affect other things? Maybe. So we talked a little bit about live virus vaccines like measles, mumps, rubella. Maybe mRNA technology will change that, so we won't even have to worry about giving those types of vaccines to immunocompromised hosts. I think the possibilities are endless.
I agree with that. And this is a game changer. There's no question, and in many, many different ways.
So what about people who are what they call the long haulers, that have the disease and it kind of comes back and never sort of goes away? Will they be eligible for the vaccine, and will it help them combat that?
I don't know. Are there any contraindications to long haulers being immunized? I haven't heard of any.
Well, that's a funny term in a short period of time. So,
Yeah.
But I think the point of the question is do we know that? We do not know that yet. There's lots of work going on in the vaccine trials about eligibility. There's a lot of questions now about if people were in a trial and find out they were randomized to a placebo or were randomized to the vaccine, should they get one of the ones that have a EUA? Those are all unanswered questions. I think sort of physiologically, it doesn't seem like it would be harmful, but would it help any? And I don't think we honestly know the long-term consequences of COVID. Some people have had continued problems, and we're still studying those.
Okay. Carol Looper asks, why did they stop the testing on some of the vaccines, some of the trials? And I want to get the vaccine, but I want to know what negatives that could happen.
I'm not sure if I completely understand the question. There were some enrollment pauses, if that's the point of the question. And I know most about the AstraZeneca trial because we're actually doing that. It was an unanticipated event. Let me just make a general comment. Enrollment pauses are a relatively common things in clinical trials. All clinical trials are designed with scheduled safety reviews, larger expert or independent monitoring reviews, and they're all designed to have stopping rules if something happens that's not expected. And both the AstraZeneca trial and the Janssen trial had short enrollment pauses because of an unanticipated event that was further adjudicated afterwards. And then you make, I'll go back to risk-benefit, then you make the decision, was it related? It's not even clear that the events were related, but without knowing that, you have to stop the trial. And everyone wants to be assured of safety. I am not sure there's any guarantees in life, but I think we will do as best we can to assure the safety of what we're doing.
I'm not sure I understand this question, but I'm going to try. Sydney Scher says, Dr. Christine Northrup has been saying some pretty far-out criticisms about the vaccine. Any information about what she's saying? I don't know anything about this.
I am not aware of any specific criticisms from her, but there have been a lot of outrageous claims, and what we have to go on right now are largely press releases and sort of early data. We're all waiting for these data to be submitted and published so we can look at them more carefully, and I think that will inform all of us in terms of what we can tell people about the safety, the real safety, the data, the numbers, the specifics, and help us inform the public about the vaccines, which ones we have access to, which ones they're about to get, and what we think about them. But I don't know of the specific comments that have been made.
And I don't either, but I do want to make a specific point that the vaccines that are currently either ready to apply for an emergency use authorization or are in ongoing accrual status, none of those vaccines can give you COVID. They are all different technologies so that you're really being exposed only to the spike protein. So that alone will not give people COVID. And I'm saying this because people have asked me this. Are you going to give me COVID? I'm not planning on that, but so not my goal. But also all the vaccine trials, because they've been phase 3, looking for long-term efficacy and safety, have all had a placebo component to it. And some people, because of quite honestly, the expansiveness of the disease, have gotten infected. And that's what all the excitement is about. The people who were in the placebo arm were more likely to have an infection that could be detected than the people who were not. And I'm sorry, I can't answer the rest of that
The
question.
other thing sometimes people think is when they get a vaccine and they might react to the vaccine, redness, fever, feel, malaise, fatigue, et cetera. It depends on how we all react to vaccines. I happen to be someone who reacts to every vaccine I'm given rather violently, and yet it doesn't mean I have the disease. It just is how my body responds to those vaccines, and it's evidence of my immune response mounting a response. So while there may be a few days of discomfort or that I'm not feeling particularly well, that does not mean you have the disease. It's more how your body is responding to what it's been given to get it to make a response to the vaccine. And we're all different. We all respond differently to any insult to our bodies, and that just happens to be one of the other ways that happens.
Which allows me to say, you cannot get the flu from the flu shot. Please get your flu shot this year.
Yes, yes.
I already have mine. I got the over 65 one, the heavy duty one. With the combination of fatigue and the politicization of both mask wearing, and do you anticipate that happening also with the vaccine? Are people just going to go, whatever? Is there a fatigue? Is there a politicization that we should be bracing for?
Well, there's definitely both right now, and I get that. We're all fatigued, but as someone who's studied viruses and bacteria my whole life, they don't care what political party you are. They don't care anything about you. They just infect you because you're a warm human body. And so my respect for them is enormous, and I hope people see it that way. I hope people see that as a way to protect themselves from getting a very potentially deadly disease. So, all we can do is be transparent and educate and continue to do that.
Excellent. Is there something that you would like to tell viewers at this moment in terms of where we are both in the pandemic and where we are in the process of developing the vaccine?
So well, we're in a crisis with the pandemic. Things are surging both here in Ohio and around the country and around the world, and I think we need to continue to be vigilant. We know that masking works. We know that distancing works, and we know that because we know how the virus is spread. It's a respiratory virus. Close contact without barriers is a high risk. We've seen that in households. If you have a household contact, your risk is pretty high. But I also want to say, I think we're all optimistic that we're making progress. There's clear evidence of progress, but we're not there yet. And so I guess what I'm asking everyone is to hang on, hang in there and wear your mask and keep your distance. And that is a particularly hard thing to say right at this time of year as we approach the holidays, but I think it's critically important.
I agree completely. And the good news, the optimism maybe is because we are seeing that by the spring or next summer, we should be in a much different place. But that means that right now, we need to redouble our efforts and maybe hopefully seeing that finish line in our future, knowing that there are vaccines and they will be coming and the cavalry is about to arrive, will hopefully inspire people to get through some of this fatigue, weather through this period, and get to the other side, and that that if you keep up your vigilance, it will pay off for all of us.
Excellent. I hope you found today's forum very informative. We're going to put up a slide for additional resources, so utilize those. I want to thank the panels for an excellent forum. I mean, I think this is something we all need to hear, so hopefully our viewership is way up today. Wednesday, November 30th, and on December 23rd and 30th, CMC will stream Encore forums. Look for information about our holiday package forums in your email. Thanks to our presenting sponsors today, Nationwide Children's Hospital and OSU's Wexner Medical Center. Live streaming is presented by the Emergency Response Fund of the Columbus Foundation and in partnership with the Columbus Dispatch and PNC. To our online virtual patrons, thank you all. And a special thanks to our speakers, Dr. Susan Koletar, Dr. Lauren Bakaletz, and Greg Moody. Happy Thanksgiving, be well, and stay safe.